If you're relatively new to leftist activism, be that anarchist, Marxist-Leninist, or some other form of anti-capitalist ideology and organization, you may have been exposed to a particular debate on the US left. What should, or shouldn't, be the relationship of leftist organizing to the Democratic Party and electoral politics more generally? This video series is going to discuss mostly the former of those two, but I will definitely be touching on the latter to solidify my overall narrative. If those political labels don't describe you, and you're simply interested in the history of the Democratic Party presented from a leftist perspective, you've come to the right place. However, I won't pretend as if this discussion isn't acutely geared towards other leftists or left-curious people. Another caveat I want to get out of the way. I'm well aware that reactionaries like Dinesh D'Souza and the like will point out bad things in the Democratic Party's history opportunistically to say, see, the left are the real racists. But that's not what I'm doing here. I'm coming from a place of viewing the Democratic Party, and bourgeois politics in the imperial core more generally, as irredeemable as a matter of political principle, not as a bad faith attack on Democrats from the right. I'm absolutely by no means arguing that the Republicans are a viable alternative. Before we dive into it, I want to lay out what I believe is at stake here. 1. There is a current among the contemporary US left that argues that the Democratic Party can be used by socialists to move public policy in a better direction, or that at best, running socialists on the Democratic Party ballot line can be a strategy to platform socialist ideas and gain a following. A prominent advocate of this strategy is Seth Ackerman, a frequent contributor to the Social Democratic Magazine Jacobin. I will provide a link to an article by him from 2016 that describes this strategy in the video description. I will refer to this current as the Ballot Line strategy, both because others who have written about it have used this name, and because it is an accurate description of the substance of the strategy. 2. Related to the previous point, the word socialism in the US is for the first time in many years gaining a currency that many would have thought preposterous even just a decade ago. But there is much at stake in this as socialism begins to shed its Red Scare stigma. What kind of socialism? The socialism promulgated by the Ballot Line adherents is basically a warmed-over sequel to the New Deal liberalism of the 1930s. While some important social reforms were introduced, the New Deal was a far cry from socialism or even social democracy, and ultimately many of these reforms have been whittled down or even eliminated altogether over the years. Ideological struggle for what socialism really means is hence a key point of contention in this revival of an anti-capitalist movement. There are many different kinds of socialism, ranging from social democracy to anarcho-communism, syndicalism, Marxism-Leninism, Maoism, and many others. Struggling for what kind of socialism our movement is trying to build, I will argue, is not merely sectarian squabbling that gets in the way of an imagined left unity, but rather the only route to working towards a unity that means anything. Obfuscating conflict in favor of a paper-thin unity for unity's sake can lead to some disastrous results, and in the long run is a detriment to the socialist movement. This doesn't mean I think we should be engaging in needless mudslinging, however. I think it is important for our movement to have principled debates. This means taking each other's ideas seriously and engaging together in struggle, not simply engage in abstract theoretical arguments over the internet, or what amounts to elaborate shitposting. Our debates should relate to the concrete situations presented to us in the course of struggle, not splitting hairs over what Marx or Lenin or Bakunin or whoever said 100 years ago. 3. I want to clarify the Marxist view of elections and how it differs from other approaches. There are two other main approaches to elections on the left. 1. The social democratic and/or liberal view that elections are the only viable way to push for change in the capitalist system, and 2. The anarchist view, generally speaking, that elections are inherently antithetical to the aims of the socialist movement. I will expand on this later in this video series, but briefly, the Marxist view is closer to the anarchist outlook here, but differs in some important regards. Marxists take a historically specific view of elections under given conditions, taking into account questions such as who gets to vote in this election, how would this candidate be held accountable to the socialist movement once put into office, etc. This can mean a total abstention in some cases, but participation, even if only provisional, in others. Hence, Marxists tend to be a bit more flexible on the questions of how to participate in the institutions of bourgeois democracy than anarchists. To be clear, however, many Marxists agree with anarchists on this topic, and often for similar reasons. These are broad strokes here, and we should do well to remember that anarchists and Marxist traditions have historically overlapped and learned from one another, even if they are sometimes at odds. I want to clarify some terminology. Throughout this video series and many of my other essays, I refer to anarchists, Marxist-Leninists, communists, etc., under the umbrella term revolutionary or revolutionary socialists, not because I think the distinctions between them are immaterial, they're very important in fact, but because I think the topic at hand is a place of some minimal agreement between the various tendencies. This generalization is not without its problems, but it's a trade-off I have found worthwhile for the purposes of most of my work. All of that being said, in my analysis, I hold the character of the U.S. capitalist state and the concrete situation with regards to how the voting franchise is implemented, restrictions on voting rights, gerrymandering, and so on, means that electoral politics in this historically specific situation are, in most cases, an ineffectual means to accomplish the socialist movement's aims. 4. The Democratic Party's history as a tool of bourgeois and imperialist political rule is often obfuscated not only by party apparatchiks, but also by nominally unaffiliated people who insist that, because the Republican Party is just so much worse, we have to vote for the quote-unquote lesser evil of the Democrats. This is particularly salient with a fascist like Donald Trump in the White House, but the lesser evil argument downplays or outright ignores the deeply racist history of the Democratic Party and the consequences that it has for the present. It also obscures the continuity between the Democratic and Republican administrations and deeply underestimates the degree to which the two parties cooperate in creating fascist institutions within the U.S. state. For example, the development and expansion of the Department of Homeland Security and its associated fascistic state machinery such as ICE under the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations. This video series is actually going to begin with this last point, because my first three theses rest almost entirely on pointing out the historical role of the Democratic Party in subjugating the socialist movement in the US, expanding US imperialism, and cooperating with the Republican Party in screwing over the working class, both in the US and the rest of the world. Background music was by Hinterheim, used under the Creative Commons license. To find more of their music, go to hinterheim.tk. Thanks for watching. If you want to support this project, please click like and subscribe, and if you have any thoughts or questions, leave a comment. I keep all of my videos and other work free of advertising and sponsored content, so if you'd like to help me keep building this project, please subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/aworldtowin, and follow me on Twitter at aworldtowin1. I'd like to thank my patrons, Greg, Emma Brophy, N. Non-Applicable A, Patrick Hamilton, Holly Irons, and Joni Molinax.